I'm passing it on to Diana.
Great. Thank you, Sydney. Hi, everybody. We're here to talk about media use, screen time, and I really can't help but wonder what it's like to be you, Dr. Walsh, being the media expert, a screen time expert in a time of our culture where it is unavoidable and it is actually our screen time has increased. So what's that like for you?
Thank you. Well, I will tell you it's making me question my expert status as I am living it at home as a parent and also as a researcher who is finding myself multitasking and looking at, all sorts of ridiculous content that I never spent time with, but I'm doing them. So, that part of it, is one component. But in actuality, what I'm really seeing is so many of the things that I've spent the last 10 years thinking about really coming to light in this super amplified context. And so what I'm seeing a lot of is questions around, and some of the things we can talk about is a lot of parents saying to me, okay, all the rules I used to have, all the frameworks I had have now gone out the window. And, should I feel horrible about that? Should I worry about that? Should I not worry about that? What can I actually do? And it sort of allowed me to present to people the nuanced perspective on this that I always wished people had.
Excellent. So what would you call, if you were going to boil down a nuanced perspective to this and put in a word like "and" in the middle of it, what would that look like?
So I think that technology for us right now, right, it is a place, it is perhaps for many of us the only place that we can connect with each other. And it's also a place where we sometimes feel really disconnected and it can make us feel lonelier or perhaps worse about ourselves, right? It's a place that is really supportive. People who are feeling very isolated are finding points of connection. Other people are experiencing incredibly judgmental moments, right? Especially in our 2020, heightened extreme political moment where, it feels like everything you say, people are yelling at you, right? So it's a lot of this dichotomy of it's both this incredible opportunity and it's a credible challenge. It's a great opportunity to feel better about ourselves, to not even about ourselves, but just to feel better in the moment. And it also is a waste of time, right? It's all of those things. And that's why I say it's more nuanced than just saying 2 hours of screen time and they're fine, and 2.5 hours and their brains rot, right? It isn't quite that simple.
So what are the elements you actually look to when you're trying to figure out whether it's valuable or productive time? What are those?
Yeah. So let me give you the version I would have given you in 2019 and then add a 2020 addendum. Okay. So my 2019 version would be it's quality of content, not necessarily the quantity. So I am super excited by a kid who might spend 3 hours on YouTube, but they are creating content. They are connecting with other kids in that space. They are finding something that they want to get involved in and using that video to send it to other people to get them involved, right? That could be 3 hours of time. That on YouTube, that feels really different to me from a kid who might be just scrolling mindlessly through YouTube, just letting the next video upload and just watch that, right? A passive moment, right? So that's what I normally would say. That still holds, right? So my preference is places to connect. My preference is anything you're doing that's really engaging you in the broader world. Right now, I think our world feels so shrunk that anything we can do to expand that social circle is great. But my 2020 addendum is this term that we call mood management, right? And that gets a bad rap. It's when we use technology to manage our moods. And in 2019, I would have said, okay, sure, it can be one way we manage our moods, but make sure your children or the people in your lives have other ways, right? That they exercise and they see friends and they do all this stuff. well, maybe we don't have as much access to those things anymore. And so using technology sometimes to manage our moods and how we might think about that, I'll give you an example from my own life. If I'm looking at the news and it's important to be involved, it's important to know what's going on, but sometimes it makes me feel awful. And I might then go, and I almost call it like a palate cleanser. I almost go look at something completely inane on the web, right? And I don't do that for 3 hours, right? That's the trick of mood management. I can't spend all afternoon doing this. But if I look for 10 minutes at something that's sort of a waste of time, but it leaves me feeling better, I'm okay with that right now. And so I think we can think about and having conversations at home. And by the way, I have this conversation with myself. I've had it about 3 or 4 times during the pandemic of like, is this actually making me feel better or do I feel worse doing this? And if I feel better, and it, by the way, might be 3 hours of, a TV show on at the end of a really difficult week, I would normally not be like, yay, Jill, good work. But during a pandemic with all of us in the house and all the challenges, I'm okay with that right now. Now, the back to that seesaw thing, the trick for me is when it gets really unbalanced. So if it becomes the thing where the seesaw is always tipping in one direction. So I might love watching, 2 episodes of The Office, but by the time I'm on the 5th episode of The Office, I'm now listless. I'm not even paying attention. I'm looking at my phone while I'm watching this show. That now the seesaw has tipped, and it isn't actually helping my mood. It's just giving me sort of more content for my brain to process on the hamster wheel. Other people find, 30 minutes of Instagram, they love it. They see what everybody's up to. At, 45 minutes, they start to do a lot of comparisons. They start to feel worse about themselves, right? So it's about knowing that cutoff, and that's really tricky for kids, right? When does something go from being, I feel better looking at baby pandas on the internet to, oh, wow, I just spent 4 hours looking at animals on the internet, right? And that's the balance that they need help with.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Can we talk about slow versus fast media? I'm curious as to whether, media, reading books on audio or whatever that is very different from playing a video game, perhaps.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. If you think about it in this context of mood management, one of the things that I always like to make very clear when I'm talking about technology is a lot of us look at the tech behavior and we get very worked up and we think, oh gosh, there's way too many video games being played in this house. And then we catastrophize. Video games are violent. They are quick. My child will be a social degenerate, right? We start to go down that path. We tend not to do that if they're doing, math games, right, on the computer, right? So, I don't have those children. If you do, that's awesome. But I have the ones that go to the social degenerate category, right around tech use. But why I bring that up is because we get very fixated on the tech instead of thinking about how kids are using, or even adults are using the tech to manage things that are challenging. And so when you bring that distinction between listening to a book versus a video game, I see value in both, but it's one of those, it depends, right?
Yeah, so that makes total sense. I just wanted to talk about that Tetris research I had read. Yes. It was a couple of years ago, and I think it was in 2019, but they did a study that for veterans coming back who played Tetris during a PTSD flashback. In this study, it reduced the length of the flashback and reduced the number of episodes post playing Tetris. And I've never been quite sure why that would work or how they stumbled on that. But it is an interesting thing to note that, there may even be some benefits to the way we use technology. Yeah.
100%. And so that research really intrigues me. And what I know more broadly about the anxiety world and video games is that people who are on that hamster wheel of thinking, like kids will talk to me about, I'll give you an example of a young man I worked with last spring. his parents reached out to me because he was playing video games at 2 or 3 in the morning, which, you know, they didn't love, understandably so, and they wanted me to work with him. So I did. And very early on in the conversation, it was very clear to me that what was happening was he would go to bed when he was supposed to. He would lie awake at night, and his brain would get onto that hamster wheel. The what if this happens, then this will happen, right? And then what if I'm late tomorrow? And if I'm late tomorrow and I don't sleep, right? And his brain couldn't get out of that cycle. He was, and this is actually super rational behavior because it works. He was then going to play video games, because what we know for certain about video games is you have to be in the moment when you're playing. You can't think of the future. You can't worry about the past, because if you do, you will, I don't know, whatever's happening in the video game, fall off the cliff, die, whatever's going on. You have to be in the moment. And so for people who struggle with that sort of ruminating, hamster wheel kind of thing, video games are highly effective. So when I say that, it depends thing, because for a person in that state, if you put on an audiobook, right, their brains would, the thing would be chirping in the background and they'd be like ignoring it, right? So sometimes you need those switches, right? That it really just resets your brain. And I wonder if a part of that is playing into this, because Tetris, when you get good at it, those pieces are coming down fast.
Is it? I don't know the game.
Yeah, and it really starts to happen. So you have to be very focused. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Now, someone who is in a place of, they just need a break, they want to think, you know, about something else, they're doing something that's boring. In those cases, audiobooks are fabulous, right? So it really depends on what you're thinking of. And that's why I say mood management and thinking about what you're doing. Now, I don't, in the case of that young man, I wasn't excited that he was up at 3 in the morning. But it was a rational behavior. And in that case, the technology was almost, and I'm reluctant to use this term, but it was almost the way he was self-medicating.
It was coping
right?
strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so right now, when we are in a period of, you know, obviously stress, loneliness, sadness, for some hopelessness about pandemic, you know, racial injustice, we could add the layers, right? It does make sense, and it is a viable way to manage some of those really challenging emotions. Again, the trick is bounding it, right? And making sure it isn't like, now I've spent 7 hours doing this thing, right? Because then we don't have the gain. What we're looking for is when things spike for people, and we know in most cases, this is true for social media and in gaming, it's about 30 minutes that you're involved in something.
Say more about that. Yeah.
So at the 20 to 30 minutes, and again, if you have a gamer out there and you're saying to me, yeah, right, there is no way I'm getting this person off the game in 30 minutes, I understand. But what we know, and the more we can educate each other about this, the better, because people don't know this. But what is absolutely true, and if you have a gamer in your life, I highly recommend Jane McGonigal's book, Super Better, about this. But what we know of the research is that in 20 to 30 minutes, you get all of the positives. You get visual spatial learning. You get the collaboration and organization with others. You get the fun of the competition. Am I going to make the next level, right? You get that break of the brain, you know, fire. After about 30 minutes, it starts to plateau, right? So unfortunately, it doesn't just keep getting better, right? It sort of settles out and then it starts to decline. And so what we see in people is 30 minutes of engagement with social media, they're you know, generally speaking, they're doing well, they're happy, they're involved. After that time, they start to find themselves more apathetic, more listless. Kids will describe to me, I'm scrolling through, I'm not even looking at what I'm going like this, just flying through content, right? It starts to shift. So the more we can do this and be mindful about it. So in my house, because I don't have people that are great at getting off and 20, you know, I don't have the 13-year-old that goes, oh, look, 20 minutes are up, I'm off the device. We set timers. We talk about this. We do a lot of work together on it. I also need reminders at times, right? And all of that kind of thing. The one other piece I just want to add to this quickly is when we talk about the positives of this stuff, it's that 20, 30 minutes. But here's the thing, it has to be single tasking. So what I mean is, when I gave that example of watching The Office and relaxing with it, I have to just be watching The Office. to have that relaxing dopamine moment. If I am watching The Office and, right, you got it, my brain does not get the benefit. And so it's always what my favorite line in my house is, pick a screen. You know, and if it works for you, I don't care which screen you pick, but it's not watching a show and looking at Instagram and replying to Snapchats at the same time. That actually creates, our brains aren't wired to do that as people. And unfortunately, we haven't evolved yet to be able to handle that. It actually spikes our cortisol. And so that then through the roof. And so that then feeds the beast, right? Then you get into the cycle of I must multitask because I can't feel better. So I should just do more, right? And then we're sort of consuming more and more. So when I say,
when cortisol is elevated, how do we feel? Anxious?
Yes, it actually creates that flight feeling, right? That fight or flight. So our bodies are going, wow, there's so much coming at me right now. I got to be everywhere. So let's get to heightened alert so that I am ready for anything. Now, what's important about that is if you've told yourself and your brain, well, technology makes me feel good, you're going to keep feeding your body technology because I still don't feel good, right? And that often gets us into that addictive cycle. So really, it's single tasking on a screen, and it's figuring out what works for you. And by the way, Diana, what works for you and what helps you manage your moods might not work for me. And that's okay too.
What's
right?
your secret technology pleasure?
Well, I have so many. I'm so glad you asked. I have found myself this summer becoming incredibly engaged with celebrity gossip. It's not something that I cared about so much, but I have found myself down some rabbit holes that start on people.com, and then I'm like, what is this person doing? And then I go to Instagram to look at that. Right, that is a guilty pleasure that I'm definitely using when I am overwhelmed, stressed, right? My brain just goes, you need a break, and I go to that. That one works for me. I am not a video game player, right? So for me, that doesn't appeal in the same way. And it's important for everyone in the home to understand that they may have differences around them. And you may have multiple kids in the home that all need different things. Some kids are super fired up and energized by group text. Other kids find it incredibly overwhelming. They're trying to respond, and then 5 other texts come in while they're still responding, right? Right. And so it really depends on what works for you. And so I always say, the best conversations I think you can have about technology is start with what tech behaviors or habits make you happy and which ones leave you feeling drained, and actually make people verbalize it. It's not the way we tend to think about technology, but it's such a healthier approach to it. I kind of have I think I've talked to you about this in the past. I kind of liken it to food consumption, right? And that we can't, I'm not going to sit here and say, TikTok is the worst thing that ever came out and no one should use it. And if none of us use it, we'll be infinitely happier, right? Because there actually are people who use it incredibly productively and have fun. Exactly, TikTok dances, right? But for other people, that's a social minefield, right? As in their quest for more likes, more, followers, whatever it is, right? So it's really about helping people think about it that way. It also then helps kids understand what actually works for them. When I talk to my college students and I ask them that question, they usually start with, oh my God, I've never thought about it that way. Right. And so as a result, they don't actually know, what should I be trying to work on? What is my, my Cheetos or my donuts? What's the thing I can't have one of, right? And knowing what that is and building in a set of habits around that is much more effective, I think, long-term than me just saying, here's 5 things that are awful and just never use them. It's just not realistic, especially right now when we are wired, we might as well inject our phones into our forearms. We're so connected.
That's a really, that's a good point. What brings you energy? What would you say to those people who actually use technology to numb? Right?
It's really, yeah, a lot of people do. So this is a big distinction that when I'm working with kids, the thinking I like them to have in their brains And they might not use this language, adults might not use this language, but it's the framework that I think of. It feels very different to me if a kid is saying, if I say, why do you love it? Let's say they pick something and they just say, I love it. And I say, okay, tell me why, right? That's the follow-up question. What do you love about it? If they tell me, let's take video games as the example because I was using it. If they say, oh God, it's so fun. And I'm, playing with 6 friends and, there's this, level I'm trying to get past and I cannot get there, but I'm working on it, right? That feels really different to me from a kid who says, and this is that framework, I just need a break from my life. I need an escape. This for me is an escape. I don't have to think, right? That feels really different to me. Now, having said that, I don't mean to suggest that if once in a while you use technology as an escape, that does not mean horrible things are in store, right? Maybe not now, but pre-pandemic, I would have gladly passed up many a cocktail party to stay home in my pajamas and watch Netflix, right? I don't think doing that once in a while is a bad thing, right? As a break. We need to just, to relax. Our lives are on hyper, drive. But a person who is consistently using technology in that way, that for me is a warning sign that there's underlying problems going on, right? And that's where I say technology certainly can be the cause of challenges for people. It absolutely is. But it also can be masking underlying challenges that we haven't thought about. And that's where I think, okay, that warrants a follow-up conversation.
Absolutely. I think the thing that is most alarming to me is the one screen rule. I mean, I am so guilty of having TV on, in the background with my solitaire on my Kindle and picking up my phone every few minutes, looking at my email or shopping on my phone, and it's really interesting that it does spike cortisol, which does increase anxiety.
Yeah.
And we become much more animal. Yeah.
Yes. And I think especially, I'm so glad you said that because I think especially at this time, when we're really already tense and wired for that, it's even more likely. Like, I don't know if you have found, Dinah, but I have found my attention span feels less. I'll be reading a book and all of a sudden I'm like, did I even read? What is going on in this? Right? My brain is just sort of left the space, which as a researcher, I love to read, right? I'm the biggest dork around and I can't find myself engaged. I also have found myself impatient with a commercial, right? When I'm watching a show. And I think what's happening is because we're already in that heightened state, our brains are telling us, just give me more input. And actually what we kind of need is to slow down. And it is so hard. And so what I do is what I say is like, we pick something in our family and we're going to do it or engage in something and everything else has to go away. So last night, 3 of us were watching the Celtics game. We had to make sure the phones weren't right next to us because it's too darn tempting. It just is. And however tempting it was in 2019, it's infinitely more tempting now. I also think connected to this, this is a great opportunity for empathy and perspective taking with our family members, and particularly our, if we have kiddos, letting them know that it's hard for us right now and that we get it. It can be incredibly valuable because a lot of kids are telling me, I feel this, but I think I'm the only one, right? The classic kid feeling, right? It's just me. And knowing that we're going through it, and I will say to my kids, I'm like, wow, I am overdoing it right now. Will you help me? Giving them that opportunity to see that I need, and what I really want to label for them is the self-awareness, right? It's not so much that I'm doing it right or wrong. It's that I'm catching myself in a moment where I'm going, wow, I am so overwhelmed by what I'm doing. I need to make a change. That's the experience that I want them to learn. Not that I'm going to be perfect every minute. I am absolutely multitasking in the kitchen. All those things are definitely happening.
Right. Lot to think about. Is there a form of media that you would recommend in this time for slowing us down? Or is that antithetical to media?
Great question. I think right now, what is best for us is, and it does slow us down and it gives us a lot of other benefits, is using technology to connect synchronously with others. So what you and I are doing right now, having a conversation in real time. Yes, it's a little fake. Yes, it sometimes digitizes our voice, all those tech challenges, but that is a much slower form of communication. So I recommend FaceTime. Kids who love to do house party and see each other. Facebook Messenger for younger ones where they can video chat each other, right? Those kinds of opportunities to have this synchronous back and forth actually is much slower paced. The other one that is even slower, and dare I say is going to make me sound so old, is actually a phone call. and I will tell you why I'm such a proponent of the phone call in 2020. We know for certain that we think we're really good at reading faces and social cues. And a lot of parents say to me, oh, I don't like the phone because they never look us in the eye anymore and that they won't know how to read social cues. And a part of me I get the respect, I get all that. But what we actually know of the research is we're horrible at reading social cues from faces. So actually, if you want people to read social cues, the worst thing you should do is make them look at each other. The way we actually understand each other's emotions the best is when we are not face to face and we just hear a voice. And so kids in particular right now who are overdosing on Zoom, who are like, the last thing I want to do is have a Zoom lunch with my friends, which I get. If they can take a walk and call a friend and just talk as they walk, that will feel so much more enriching to them than 5 texts that they've fired back and forth to people, which, there's value in it, certainly as we're isolated, but that I have to process it, then I respond in the moment is really valuable. We aren't getting a lot of that right now. And to be totally honest, our social skills do atrophy. It's kind of a muscle that we need to practice.
We're getting
and
awkward.
So we are getting super awkward. And it's been fascinating as kids are, some kids are headed back to a hybrid model or some versions. They're expressing so much more nervousness about going back because of exactly what they're like, I haven't talked to a group of people since last March. Right. And so the more we can do, and even if it's with an adult, if friends don't want to call each other because that's weird, if there's a relative they can call, an older sibling, things like that, that is a real slow form of communication that will pay dividends for all of us.
So I think we're out of time. So I'm going to synthesize the one thing I heard really loud and clear, and that is, to the extent that technology and media is used for connection, to the extent that it's being used to elevate mood and not numb out most of the time, and to the extent that we try and stay connected to how am I feeling in talking about the issue, we are making headway right now during this.
Absolutely. And I would just end with, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad if you go to the end of the day and you think, oh gosh, my kid was on a device for 6 hours today and they're like, this is a finite moment that we will get through and we can adjust accordingly. But my worst fear right now is that kids are finding themselves even more isolated than they could be. And so to the extent that we can use tech to achieve that, the better.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Everybody, we appreciate you joining us today. If you have individual questions, please reach out. Otherwise, have a great afternoon on this warm East Coast day, I will say. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.